The second coda of the Map Is Indestructible by O.G. Rose. Once a map emerges, a logic naturally arises that makes it moral to stay in and inconceivable to venture out, a process of insulation and map sealing. Then we employ dominant strategies in life to keep back anyone who would challenge our map, an act which also makes us seem right to stay in our map. After all, no one is able to pierce it. It's safe. It should be our home, bloodbound. Section 1. We explored in the first 4 essays of this essay book why it is natural for us to make maps, using the term map naturing, which is supposed to play on the idea that it is our nature to make maps, with a critical acknowledgement that we require maps, all while stressing their danger. We cannot live on notions alone. We require frameworks. And once we invest in a framework and pour our time and energy into it, we will not give it up easily. To do so could be like suffering a mini-apocalypse per se, and so we will happily use apocalyptic thinking to protect it. Such changes the rules of thinking in a manner that protects us from critique, while at the same time making it right and moral to stay within our map. The intensity of apocalyptic thinking, furthermore, makes it emotionally difficult and burdensome to consider otherwise, while at the same time making it easy to emotionally overreact toward anyone who would question our map, which under normal circumstances, social etiquette might hold us back from so behaving. This suggests apocalyptic thinking might make it easier to behave like sociopaths, who arguably have advantages in maintaining power throughout various social dynamics precisely because the sociopath doesn't care what other people think. Does this mean game theory dynamics can favor those who are the worst behaving? I fear so, suggesting why autonomous rationality leads to suboptimal results. But more on that later. Someone who believes X map must be followed or the world will end is sealed within that map. It is very difficult to access that person, for all logic, reasoning, and thought has been shifted in favor of that map. With this comes emotions, personal defense, and the like. All of these contribute to map sealing. For the planet is on the line. Humanity is on the line. Children are on the line. Everything. What kind of monster would risk everything? And in this way, we can see how apocalyptic thinking is a supremely rational goal for map making and map sealing, which again suggests why autonomous rationality leads to Nash equilibria and suboptimal results. Furthermore, apocalyptic thinking can isolate people from everyone except those who agree with the apocalyptic thinking, forming tribes, generating savior complexes, spreading pathologies, and/or profoundly intensifying the map sealing. Furthermore, dealing with people can be hard. The real of Lacan might manifest. But fortunately, our map makes it clear that we do nothing wrong to avoid people. In fact, we might be saving the world. Not only does apocalyptic thinking morally seal us within our map, but there is another way in which we can use blood to our advantage. We can ground and justify our maps with the sacrifices of martyrs, soldiers, noble people, children, saints, friends, and the like. Blood seals, and please note we will be incentivized to appeal to blood quickly and often, as described regarding the game theory of conversation, for the one who implements a dominant strategy quickly and first tends to win. And blood seals both in that it makes us afraid to spill blood in risking the apocalypse, and in that it makes us afraid we will dishonor blood through, say, forsaking or disregarding the sacrifice of soldiers, martyrs, and the like. Also, our view seems safer in the dead, beyond this life where people are alive and capable of critique, which at the same time can make our views feel transcendent and thus a solution to Gödel's incompleteness problem. History is perhaps a story of people using blood for a sense of epistemic justification, as perhaps perfected by Christ. For blood is how we can gain a sense of axioms, which must actually be missing, while at the same time making it too much to think that those who gave their blood for those axioms could have shed blood for nothing. We become humble and moral to defer to them, as perhaps we want. And if anyone accuses us of using the dead for our own ends, We can perhaps genuinely claim we are only honoring what they died for and thus are living as they would have wanted us, which is to suggest they died wanting to be used as martyrs. They died wanting to be used as means. If we employ this dominant strategy, we can accuse the questioner of being insensitive, cruel, heartless. The benefits of appealing to blood are vast. There might even be incentive to throw blood at problems that we know we've messed up, precisely to hide that error. For who would question it if lives were given up in its name? Perhaps there is incentive to do this, the insane, precisely because nobody wants to face the reality we have done something insane, which would unveil the world as a place where insane things can happen. Are there ways in which we can make maps too important to fail? The tricks of maps know no bounds. Section 2. As corporations and banks can find it rational to become too big to fail, so maps can seek blood and apocalyptic thinking precisely to become too invested in to be false. Such an invincible state is rational for rationality to gain for itself, which it can then defend by using dominant strategies in and through conversation, interaction, and the like. However, as we'll get into, the very fact that we turn to blood at all for our maps can suggest a critical truth, mainly our reliance on something non-rational, and hence why we can be careful not to look too carefully or closely at what we are doing. We want the benefits of blood for our maps without noticing what must be true for those benefits to exist, mainly the distinction between the true and the rational. We are careful to snatch what we want without looking. Map sealing only works if we don't let ourselves be conscious that we are indeed map sealing. Hence the importance of ethics and morality in making it right that we don't question what we are doing. As discussed by Herbert Finnegaret, how people are capable of self-deception, for example, is always a strange question. For if we know we are deceived, we cease to be. Thus, for self-deception to work, we must go about it in a way that keeps us from realizing that we are going about it. Likewise, if we are engaged in map sealing, we can't let ourselves know we are engaged in map sealing, for then we could have to see ourselves as engaged in ideological enclosure. To avoid facing this, ethics and morality are a great tool, for we then make it right to do what we are doing and engage in acts of map sealing. If it is moral not to question our map, if it is selfless to keep ourselves from venturing beyond it, and if it is principled to use dominant strategies to keep people from thinking that which could cause the apocalypse, then even if we do somewhere engage in map sealing, we primarily engage in doing what's right. Who cares then if we're critiqued as brainwashed or ideological? We're moral. On this point, it should be noted how fear and anxiety also contribute to map sealing, which are discussed notably in works like Concerning Epistemology and On Worry, both by O.G. Rose, paper I considered including in the Map Is Indestructible, but left for second thoughts instead. Still, I wanted to note here how those papers could be read in relation to map sealing, for I believe the ideological role of fear is great. As written in the epilogue to the paperback release of Missing Axioms by Samuel Barnes, martyrs are psychologically invaluable, for if someone dies for our beliefs, this helps us feel like our beliefs must be true, which we cannot know. Blood stabilizes us, and a world without martyrs might be a world which tore itself apart, as Gerard warns might be the fate of a world without scapegoats. Our martyrs help us feel that we have not ignored Socrates, that our city is not arbitrary, that our devotion is not brainwashing. In all of us naturally seek martyrs, founding fathers, the soldiers of the world wars, the saints. Perhaps only blood stabilizes us, and hence the need for a religion in the afterglow West, which focuses on regular practices of drinking blood. Martyrdom provides a feeling of truth. The devil is an angel of light, hence why it is dangerous, the ultimate use of others as a means to an end. Christ overturns martyrdom as a mechanism to validate values. Christ forces us to acknowledge that we live values that we cannot escape and cannot ground. The epilogue argues that Christ is the martyr who overturns the martyr mechanism, which is to say the social tendency to use martyrs to avoid facing that we are condemned to value and embody a claim on truth. But Christ has not been interpreted this way. Instead, Christ has often been interpreted in the exact opposite way, which is to say as encouragement to rely on martyrs. We come to believe it is not only moral to do so, but saintly, and so mechanisms of map sealing are further hidden from us. Perhaps behind feelings we do God's will. Please note that I have not meant to say that blood is the only way to seal maps, but I do think it is very prevalent and perhaps the most indestructible way to map seal. Again, every section of this book is meant to highlight case studies that suggest larger movements, map naturing, map sealing, map vanishing, that easily entail dimensions not directly discussed in this book. Still, the point is so far that we map make due to our natures and then map seal via dominant strategies and power moves, which we can frame as moral so that we can conceal to ourselves what we are doing, especially if we are fast to employ such strategies. There are perhaps no methods better for keeping us within our maps than making us feel like we risk the apocalypse to leave those maps, while at the same time dishonoring the martyrs who died for the maps we occupy. The threat of spilling blood and forsaking blood is nearly unbearable to face. Blood is the stickiest glue, hence it is profoundly rational for our maps to employ apocalyptic thinking, and blood in their favor. Such moves almost seem to make our maps invincible, a point which brings to mind the rationality of invincibility and self-destruction by O.G. Rose on corporatism. Facing and overcoming this incredibly powerful move of our maps, we must do something radically non-rational, but even thinking to do that would require non-rationality to be a category in our thinking. Section 3. Only perhaps nihilism could avoid being a map. But nihilism is not possible, and even if it was, it easily couldn't be falsely justified by martyrs, for it is hard in showing to die for something we do not value. Nihilism could strangely enough help us escape the problem of maps, but the price is too high. Life becomes meaningless. But faced with maps and not sure what else to do, nihilism seems like a valid choice, and so perhaps nihilism is our response to ideology, which is to say the meaning crisis is how we are trying to avoid the totalitarian movements and world wars of the 20th century. Indeed, I think that is absolutely one way to understand the growth and spread of nihilism. There is easily a nobility behind it. Unfortunately, as with the UN in parentheses, as Mr. Barnes has argued, nihilism is impossible, and even if it wasn't, nihilism might not be sustainable, ultimately leading into something like antinatalism, which is to say we must go into the problem of maps and somehow find a better way to address it. Blood without givens is weaker than blood with givens, though blood is still remarkably powerful and perhaps practically identical in effectiveness. I'm not sure, and certainly once blood connects with desire's masterpiece, it seems unstoppable. But still, the point is that there are differences in effectiveness, and if we are to regain something like vanishing, which givens were capable of in being thoughtless, techniques must be employed, as we will discuss next. All the same, the slight change in effectiveness provides a glimpse of something through a slight crack that wasn't so readily present until givens collapsed. Through this crack, we might catch sight of what makes possible the problem of maps, and what also might help us sublate that very problem into absolute communities. Looking ahead, though it requires elaboration, blood suggests and hints at a critical reality, which is that ultimately everything comes down to axioms and our choices of which axioms we will ascribe to and which we will not. And this choice seems to come before rationality organizes our thoughts, which begs a question. How do we rationally choose what axioms we live according to if the axioms come before the rationality? What does that say about rationality itself? Indeed, these questions linger, and if we must make a choice of some kind, that's terrifying. Perhaps maps and blood help us avoid this anxiety? Perhaps maps can make us believe we can live in a world where we don't have to make deep trade-offs. Is avoiding a tragic life that we're then responsible for one of the great temptations of maps? And why shouldn't we give into that temptation if, once we do, we can self-forget that we gave into it, especially if the map is desire's masterpiece. Section 4. If the world will end if we do not do X, then we must do X. And if X happens to confirm our map and seal us within it while simultaneously equipping us with dominant strategies that make us unreachable in our sealed map, we have no choice but to do what is right. Within my map, it also becomes basically immoral to question it, because doing so might tempt us to do that which could prove apocalyptic, unjust, unpatriotic, unloving, so on. We are right to live in our map silently and thoughtlessly. But can we be so thoughtless if givens have collapsed, as argued in Belonging Again? We certainly will try, which is to say we turn to ideology and fundamentalism to avoid the existential anxiety resulting from the loss of givens, and apocalyptic thinking itself will contribute to us doing everything in our map to make maps practically identical to givens, perhaps never admitting our failure. That said, as Belonging Again acknowledged, though blood is perhaps the most powerful dominant strategy for maintaining a map, it is still the case that the effectiveness of blood is weaker after the collapse of givens, for it is easier today for people to question maps which defend themselves with blood, given that it seems to people as if billions of people died throughout history for religions and wars which are not true. Blood is still very effective, especially in the form of apocalyptic thinking coupled with other dominant strategies, but nevertheless I do think blood is weakening, and so something else has raced in to fill the gap, mainly the perfection of the internally consistent system in desire's masterpiece. For now, we must examine the next step in how maps operate and defend themselves, which is through distraction, redefinition, business, and ultimately vanishing. Map vanishing is what all maps naturally engage in, and though it's harder for maps to do this without blood, it is not impossible, and operations of map vanishing are still in play. If we are to understand the problem of maps, understanding map vanishing is necessary, and blood is still with us. We are not out of the dark woods of that problem. And once we map make, then map seal, we need to engage in map vanishing if we are to totally enclose ourselves, total depravity, for Kierkegaard, suggesting self-relating effacement. Then we'll be safe and happy, yes? For more about O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, and Instagram. For the list of pieces in the Map Is Indestructible, please visit Medium, and you can find a playlist on YouTube. And thank you so much for your time.